Stories of Great Christians. From its radio studios in Chicago, the Moody Bible Institute greets its friends everywhere with Chapter 18 in the transcribed story of Florence Nightingale, the Lady with the Lamp. Augustus Stafford went to Scutari to conduct a private investigation of conditions in British Army hospitals. He found the stench and general atmosphere unbearable. He protested vigorously to officials, but found everyone either frightened or unwilling to take responsibility. Finally, he left Major Sillery with a warning.
If those places aren't cleaned, I'll write a letter exposing the whole situation and have it read aloud in the House of Commons.
But just as it was no one's business to clean the lavatories, it was no one's business to clean the wards. Such responsibilities Florence Nightingale assumed because no one else would. On January 2, 1,200 sick men arrived at Scutari in one consignment. Under this impossible load, the administration collapsed, and Florence Nightingale became the rock to which everyone clung. In the ward, she directed the placement of soldiers.
That ward is full. You can stop bringing them in here. I think this ward will hold about 50 if we're careful.
I'll tell the carriers, ma'am.
Mrs. Lawford, would you bring the pail and your brush in here and start scrubbing in this corner, please?
Yes'm.
If we hurry, we can get this place clean before they bring the men in.
I'm hurrying as fast as I can, Mum.
Oh, I know you are. You've been at this thankless scrubbing for hours.
But what a difference it makes in the wards, Mum.
Well, you're certainly right about that. Here comes the orderlies with a pile of mattresses.
Looks like that bunch of her mattresses you had sent in from Constantinople, Mum.
Yes, I know the soldiers will like these much better than the straw. Will you put the mattresses here on the floor, then go back for another load, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Lawford, I hate to delay you, but I do need a messenger. Would you mind running down to the quarters and tell Mrs. Bracebridge to send whatever nurses are available up to this ward with 50 sheets?
Yes, Mum. Right away, Mum.
Looks like this tub hasn't been emptied today. What a filthy mess. Orderly.
Ma'am? Oh, no, Miss Nightingale. I know what you're thinking, please. I've got work to do right here, ma'am. All right. I'll do it. You'll stand there for an hour till I do.
Thank you.
You leaving now?
Yes, I've pretty well taken care of what has to be done here. I do need to check in the next ward and have a talk with Dr. McGregor. The ones coming in now, Dr. McGregor, they all seem to have pretty much the same symptoms.
You've noticed the teeth, Miss Nightingale?
Yes, many of the men are losing their teeth, and a few have even lost toes. It looks like scurvy, but it can't be.
Maybe it can't be, but it is.
But why should they have scurvy?
Lack of vegetables and lime juice, of course.
Well, there's supposed to have been no lack of those things. Why, whole shiploads of cabbages were shipped to Sebastopol, according to my own knowledge.
Yes, they were shipped. But I guess you didn't hear what happened to those cabbages.
What?
There's no regulations governing cabbages written into the regulations.
Oh, no.
The cabbages weren't consigned to any one man in particular. No one accepted them. So at last they were just dumped overboard into the harbor.
Oh, shocking. And now the results. Boatloads of scurvy patients. Our trouble is with organization, Doctor. Or rather, lack of it. There should be some one person who has general authority to do things and who could demand action. Then things like this wouldn't happen.
It's a little late to change the setup now.
Sidney Herbert is doing what he can, I know that. I know he writes to officials here begging them to go ahead. He says there's no need to pay too much attention to red tape when there's an emergency.
You missed your calling, Miss Nightingale. What you should have is a post in the War Department.
The hospitals were destitute. There were no sheets when I came, no blankets, no mattresses. Happily, I had brought a supply of things from France. And when these were gone, I was fortunate in finding a great source of supply in Mr. MacDonald, a gentleman responsible for money collected by the Times newspaper. One day, as we talked...
Well, I've bought quite a lot of things for you, Miss Nightingale. Do you remember your first request?
How well I remember, Mr. MacDonald. 200 hard brushes and sacking for scrubbing the floors. Oh, you don't know how grateful I was.
And it's many a thing I've got you since, too.
Yes, socks, shirts, knives and forks, wooden spoons, tin bars, table and forms, cabbages and carrots.
And operating tables, didn't forget.
And remember the big order for towels and soap and small tooth combs? And precipitate for getting rid of lice.
And that's why you wanted the scissors. And of course, there were bedpans and stump pillows.
And if we hadn't provided them, I don't know how they'd ever got to the men.
It was no more than a month ago that the men were tearing at the food with their fingers.
Those who could manage it, you mean?
Yes. The trouble was that the men lost everything after the Battle of Alma when they were forced to abandon their knapsacks.
That was by order of the officers, wasn't it?
Aye, and thousands of men from that day to this have had naught but what they stood up in.
How they pull at one's heartstrings.
Aye.
Coming into the hospital in rags, they invariably leave in their hospital clothes. I can't deny them the privilege either. Otherwise, they just have to go away unclad.
If only there were something in the regulations to take care of these things, Miss Nightingale. There ought to be a provision that knapsacks and gear lost or abandoned in battle would be replaced.
And state how it's to be replaced and by whom. As is, no one will take any responsibility because no one is assigned.
All I can say is it's a good thing that you're here.
Thank you, sir. Well, to business. Let me compare my list with your inventory, Mr. MacDonald. Perhaps When the medical men discovered they could get supplies from me, men from other army hospitals began sending requests. I was careful never to supply anything, however, until the request was properly signed and the purveyor, Mr. Rufford, had written on it that he had none in store. In February, I got a request from the medical officers at Balaclava for shirts. I decided to take this request to Mr. Rufford myself. So I brought the paper to you, Mr. Rufford. It's properly signed, as you can see.
Oh, let's see. Yes, it looks like the correct form and all.
Well, I'll leave it with you then. There's no reason for me to take care of a request like this, is there?
But we have no shirts in store, Miss Nightingale.
Well, you received a shipment of 27,000 4 days ago.
Oh, those aren't unpacked yet.
Not unpacked? Well, why don't you unpack them?
Oh, I can't. We can't say officially that we have shirts until we've had a board meeting.
Oh, well, now, you could take care of the board very easily. I noticed that all the bales have numbers on them showing how many shirts are in each bale. Now, you send a couple of bales to the hospital at Balaclava, and then when the board meets, just tell them how many you've already sent away.
Sounds very easy, but...
Well, the board isn't going to object to your sending clothing to sick, dying soldiers lying naked in the bitter cold, is it?
It's a matter of regulation. We have to do things according to form.
And for a matter of form, you let the men shiver and sicken in the cold?
Oh, you miss the point altogether. I couldn't send them even if I wanted to. The shirts are all up at the General Hospital, and I couldn't get an order in time to fill this request.
What you'd prefer, then, is that I go ahead with it. Is that it?
If you have shirts...
I have some.
Well, I guess then, if you just want to fill this order yourself...
All right. But don't you think it's fair that you should at least replace my shirts?
Well, I can give you some back after we've had a board meeting to authorize it.
All right. I'll do that. And after your board has met, you'll see that I get the shirts back? It's settled, then?
Yes, I think that will settle it very satisfactorily, ma'am. I do hate to bother you this way, but we must be very careful of the regulations, ma'am.
In January 1855, there were 12,000 soldiers in the hospitals and only 11,000 in the army camps. And still shiploads came pouring down upon us. It was a calamity unparalleled in the history of calamity. The heroism of the men was a light shining in the midst of universal horror. They suffered so quietly and endured with such courage that my heart went out to them. Their gratitude was a warm comfort in the midst of tribulations.
Say, you're new in the hospital, ain't you?
Yeah, they just brought me in last night.
How you like it?
To tell you the truth, I thought I was in heaven. I nearly froze to death strapped to the mule that brought me down from Balaclava to the ship.
I know what you mean. Did you have to lay on the ship a long time before she sailed? Some men say they were on for days, some nearly a week.
Guess I'd be dead if they'd done that to me. Luckily, they sailed the day after I was put aboard. I'll never forget that cold, nasty trip with the wind blowing and the ship pitching and all.
It's awful not having a blanket to keep you warm.
When I got here and they washed me and cut my hair and laid me on this mattress with a sheet under me and a blanket and all. Well, it's heaven is all I can say.
That's all Miss Nightingale's doings. I've been here for weeks. Guess I'd have died a long time ago if it wasn't so tough. I've seen a lot of changes.
Everybody says Miss Nightingale's an angel.
She is that. And she's interested in us. Why, every night you see her walking through the wards, holding up the lamps so she can see better.
She looks at all the soldiers.
Yes, and she knows just which ones is the bad cases. Seems to have an uncanny feel for spotting them. And she never gives up without a fight.
Well,
she stays right by any man that's real sick and nurses him herself right up to the end. Some of them dies, but she's pulled a lot of them through. The doctors said it was hopeless.
She's a real determined lighter, you can see that.
I should say. One time I heard her going by with a bunch of doctors, and they was all saying, "But that's impossible, it can't be done." And I hear her answer real quiet-like, "But it must be done."
It wouldn't surprise me to hear that she got it done either.
Why, if she were at the head of this man's army, well, we'd be in Sebastopol in a week.
Soldiers who were discharged went back to England, and word of my activities spread from cottage to cottage. I value the gratitude of these humble people much more than the jewels, the tributes, and the public praises later to be showered upon me. In November, my sister Poppy wrote,
"The people love you with the kind of passionate tenderness, Flo, that touches my heart. Sidney Herbert thinks it would be useful to the cause to remind officials of your immense popularity, so he's organizing meetings to give people an opportunity to publicly recognize and commend your achievements."
Burlington Street, this 29th of November, the most interesting day of your mother's life. It's very late, my child, but I can't go to bed without telling you that your meeting has been a glorious one. The place was simply crowded out, and there were speeches by a half-dozen famous men. Among them was Sidney Herbert himself. He read a soldier's letter telling of your carrying a lamp through the wards at night. It was touching to hear how the soldiers turned to kiss your shadow as you passed.
It was a surprising revelation to discover that back home, almost overnight, they had made me a national heroine.
And so we conclude Chapter 18 in the transcribed story of Florence Nightingale, The Lady with the Lamp. This is another in the series of Stories of Great Christians, which come to you from the radio studios of the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago.